This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
I have a practice outside of Talent on a lovely piece of property off Wagner Creek. And we see folks for all kinds of medical problems. And that's one of the hats I wear. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work I do in mapping our bodies in my clinical practice. I'm going to also tell you about my other hat, which is I'm currently the executive director of the Rosetta Stone Institute, and we are a research institute looking at taking what I do on a clinical level to a much deeper level, looking at some basic science of how our bodies communicate and how they work. And in particular, we're looking at the mechanisms of acupuncture, and we're going to be talking about the possibilities for human regeneration. And most of the second half of the presentation tonight will be looking at that particular piece. And as we talk, you'll see how all of those are related. Now, does anybody have any pressing questions? We just got a small group here. Did anybody read our little blurb and have anything that they want to just throw out? And I'll either say I'll answer it in the presentation, or we'll kind of get it off our chest right here. Okay. So right here, well, it's supposed to be a little pebble and a ripple. So I wanted to start this way, just because what we're up to tonight is I'm dropping a little ripple into the middle of Ashland, and I'm dropping a little pebble, and I hope to cause a little ripple, and you guys in the networking that you do are going to be my wave of expanding information. And the other reason I wanted to start with this is our bodies are multicellular organisms. There's 1 trillion or so cells in our human body, and about 10 trillion bacterial cells that live within us as well. And our animal trillion cells have to be able to communicate. And there's lots of different ways that it communicates. And we're going to talk about some of those ways that are perhaps a little less understood. And we communicate in a networking effect, networking process. Important messages in a cell or in an organ or in the body itself are communicated, and either a cascade of greater effect happens, or the information gets dampened down. And this, a little hard to see, is a ripple, but as you have multiple ripples spreading out, you get interference patterns. That's about what we got. And interference patterns are a property of waves. Networking is, on the surface, a property of particles, but it's very interesting as you look at larger and larger networks. They're actually the mathematics of networks actually began to look just like the mathematics of waves in quantum physics. Did anybody recently see the research that showed how it isn't just that there are waves or there are particles? They've actually been able to just show in the last couple of weeks that you can have more wave, little bit particle, little less wave, more particle. There's an infinite continuum between a wave and a particle. And in fact, the way that information is shared in the world is some kind of mixture of this wave-particle event. When you put it all together, you can get an ecosystem, a complex thing we call life. And we're going to talk about mapping what life looks like. Now, the institute that I'm associated with has as its mission to map the energetic physiology of humans. And I chose this particular metaphor for this institute because, as we know, the Rosetta Stone, does everybody know the story of the Rosetta Stone? It was found 1799 by Napoleon's army. They dug up this big black basalt monolith, about yay big, and eventually it worked its way into the British Museum. But what was important about the Rosetta Stone is that it had 3 languages saying the same thing. One of them was Egyptian hieroglyphics, of which we were completely clueless how to translate. We just didn't know. And it also had Coptic and Demotic, which were Greek versions. They used the Greek alphabet, and we were able to use the Demotic script because we could understand that to begin to unlock the key to decoding the Egyptian hieroglyphic language, which opened up the entire culture of Egypt. And it's a fascinating culture. So we want to use the same kind of idea. How can we use the physics that we understand, the biology and chemistry that we understand, to begin to probe into unknown mysteries, to decode? And so we are using at the Rosetta Stone Institute biological and biochemical type studies along with electrophysiological studies to begin to unravel how does this multicellular life organism actually communicate and work together in complex ways. So is that completely unreadable from out there? Okay. Well, let's just look at it as kind of a general. This is a person here. The energy that comes out of a person can be monitored and understood. However, you're going to always run into some noise. Okay, so that's what these little blocks are. And noise can be problems in how we connect up with that individual, anticipations, ideas we have. We can take that information that gets through those filters, and just like running white light through a prism, we can break out that information into, at this point, we have 27 different channels or colors, if you will, in the energetic communication system within the human body. Okay, does this make sense? So what that means is we can apply, once we've divided this energy into 27 different pieces, we can apply a filter that allows us to only look at one or two or several of these communication channels at a time. So we can look at our bioelectric system and just study the electrical events happening in the body. We can look at our genetic system, and we can actually, as we'll talk about later, actually show how we can map our body's chromosome information or problematic parts of our chromosome information on the body once we have separated that energy spectrum. This goes on up to tissues and organs, the lymphatic and immune system. For example, in the immune system, also in number 17, which is neurotransmitters and hormones, you'll notice I'm wearing some magnets on here. A couple of 3 days ago, allergies just started really getting me bad, so I use my own body to begin to talk to it, have a communication with my body, and find out, using some testing, what's going on and what am I reacting to. Eventually found out me and Goldenrod and Douglas fir aren't getting along right now. So I began to apply some magnets and acupuncture points to eliminate my allergies. And I wouldn't really be here in nearly as good a state as I am tonight had I not been able to figure out how to have a conversation with my body and get my body to stop the itchy eyes, the runny nose, and all the other annoying things that allergies can happen. Now, this is supposed to be a picture of an Indian Buddha, and his hands are in what are called a mudra position. And what I found was very interesting. I just began playing with testing different parts of the hand, and what I found was along the sides of the hands, between the joints and at the tips, were points that for no particular reason would react. And what I found was that when I had a person in a mudra, then information from the body was restricted to one of these languages, if you will, of the body. So that was an inconvenient way of doing it. I eventually turned these mudras into energetic testing vials. But the same idea remains. So we're able to very quickly separate information out into the 27 systems. So what does that mean? If somebody had a problem, say, with a shoulder in here tonight, what we could do is we could go and have them put their hands over the shoulders, and we could get a change in state. Now, I use biological amplification. That means I may do a muscle test, or I'll do some sort of biofeedback test from the body. So if you put a hand on an area that's got a problem, a normally strong muscle will become weak. Now, if you put, let's say that person just has a structural problem, and I put a filter for the bioelectrics over here, and there's nothing wrong with the well, that was a bad example. Bioelectrics, there's always going to be something if there's a structural problem. But let's say basic chemistry, number 2. If I put that vial on, filter on in the circuit, and I have that person put their hand on the shoulder, even though the shoulder has a problem, and normally the muscle would go from normal to weak, it won't go weak anymore. The indicator muscle process of applied kinesiology is altered by putting in these filters. So what I could find, for example, is somebody puts their hand on their shoulders and I say, aha, okay, we have a problem at the structural level. We have a problem with tissues. We have an emotional thing going on, because that also allows the information of weakness and normalcy to come through. So maybe this is a little easier. This is a similar kind of thing. We can take that information and break it up into several categories. We can break that information up into basic chemical information like pH, the genetics of the body, this would be metabolism. This is how are we burning? How are we burning the food we're eating and combining it with oxygen to burn it to make energy? And finally, our enzyme systems, which of course are related to the genetics. So one area that we might look at is the chemical aspect of the body. So for example, if from that person who's perhaps having pancreatitis, we can get information from the pancreas, and we can break that information about the pancreas, and we can find out, are there chemical problems going on now? The most common one, for example, with the pancreas, is the pancreas isn't producing enough bicarbonate to neutralize the stomach acid coming down from the stomach. That will show up as a particular test for alkalinity in chemistry. So we could take that pancreas information and also break it down into the cellular category. This has to do with cellular organelles, which are like all of the innards of an individual cell. The cell membrane is a very interesting place, the nucleus, etc. Or we could do it at the level of classes of cells. When I was working with my allergies that I had, for example, I was interested in which tissues were involved in this allergic response with immunoglobulin E and histamine and whatnot. So what I did was I put on the filter for cells along with a sample of the Douglas fir and the goldenrod. When I put on the filter of cells, it's very interesting. The acupuncture system immediately converts to telling me information about tissues. The pericardium channel becomes a way of discriminating about 300 different tissues. It goes right up along here. Now, there were 2 tissues that showed up, and there's little marks right there and right there on me that related to the mucous membrane around my eyes and another one around my nasal passages. So when I did a treatment, I included these particular tissues in the treatment so that I could focus my treatment on those 2 specific tissues. Spatial temporal is another category. Structure is our what's going on in space with our different with our tissues, and this is biorhythms. This is how are we organized in time. So we have spatial temporal. I'll just go on. So organs down here, these are localized organs, is one category, and then from there we go into systemic organs. For example, the relationship between organs. You know, in Chinese medicine, one of the things we were talking about is the five elements. Has everybody heard of the 5 elements? Fire, earth, metal, water, wood. Okay. It turns primarily in Chinese medicine, you can apply these concepts of 5 elements to anything, but in Chinese herbology in particular, we apply these concepts to the level of organs. So for example, our heart is considered a fire organ. If our heart is going through congestive heart failure, you might have too much water and cold in this fire organ. Okay, so one of the things that's very interesting is in the process of mapping our organs and our acupuncture system, what I actually found is that there are, in fact, on the Chinese acupuncture system, there are 6 elements, 6 points that behave in the way that the traditional 5 elements do. So I don't know what the 6th element is, but I think somebody stole my thunder and made a movie out of it some years ago. So in the systemic organs, there's also things like the lymphatic system, the immune system, circulatory system, our hormones and neurotransmitters, and the nervous system. And over here is our bioenergetic system. This is where the acupuncture system comes in, the bioelectric system. These 2 we're going to talk a lot about. That's where we're going to start diving a little deeper into those 2 pretty shortly. There's also another system, the scalar, we'll mention shortly. And then finally, we get into an area I called mind mapping. Some of those mind maps could have equally been over into the bioenergetic category. These would include things like our emotions, our etheric body, our interpersonal map. You know, what is the energetics that helps control how we interact on an interpersonal level? Chakras, our levels of consciousness, and extraordinary senses. This is like 6 senses, 7 senses, whatever. And finally, the belief map or the spirit map. What do you believe about the world that constructs your reality and then puts limits, if you will, on your reality? So this was one of the pieces of research that I did most of this work about 15 years ago, and I created this whole filter system that allowed us to break up our body's energetic systems into these 27 pieces. Once you've got it broken down into a small piece, then you can do all kinds of interesting things. You can actually look at how an emotion over here affects the neurotransmitters over here, and how that then creates a problem at a cellular level here, which then affects a genetic expression here, which then affects the acupuncture system here, which then affects et cetera, et cetera. So literally, the whole mind-body split thing, we begin to eliminate that distinction between mind and body, because now we have a way of tracking the network or the wave of information as it begins to spread through the body. Does that make sense? You with me? So, a classic esoteric metaphysical assertion, which occurs in Chinese medicine, was also held to be sacred by Newton, as below, so above. And basically Newton says, well, if we've got gravity and apples and heads down here, maybe the moon and the stars up there have the same behavior, the same forces apply. So I wanted to mention a couple of different metaphysical presumptions, and then talk about a third one that I feel like this work that I've done supports. The first one is reductionism, and everybody knows what reductionism, which basically says that you can take complex things, reduce them to their constituent bricks, and then you can understand big things. Inductionism, esoteric philosophy, would say that as above, so below, that there's some informative intelligence that informs things down here, and some of the complexity we see is as a result of this pre-existing intelligence, if you will. So what I would say is that there's a third possibility, which is something of a combination of the two. What I find when I'm treating people is there are times when a person's emotional state can really be largely explained by what's going on with their physiology, their chemistry. Vice versa, the inductionism might say that our emotional state affects our physiology. And I find once we can track how things bounce around between mind and body, in fact, both things happen. In fact, in that shoulder that we talked about, there's a mixture of many different things, which has been an unprovable assertion of a lot of metaphysical and bioenergetic medicines. And now we actually are close to being able to have a technology that's empirically based that can actually, prove that, in fact, our mind, if you will, is distributed through our whole body. Our mind and our emotions, we can have emotions, if you will, in our shoulders. And we can have, molecules of emotion. All of those are connected. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about some of these systems, some of the colors, if you will, of our energetic physiology. And this would come out of the mind mapping. And, there are mind maps that are very simple. For example, and I use the concept of mask here because I feel like when we have a trauma, the tendency is for us to get frozen somewhere between a fight and a flight. There's a freeze. And we put on a face in order to allow us to go on. And we can have simple masks. And I don't know, what would you say this guy is? He happy, fierce? I don't know. He's maybe a little guarded? What was that? Constipated. Okay. All right. So what about this? What about this one here? Which actually there's a little nearly a third mask happening there. I hadn't noticed before. So what is this guy over here? And melancholy, and then we got a happy guy over there. Kind of the traditional tragic comedic face. So this would be a maybe I thought I'd use it for a two-faced Janus, but now I see the third face. So that would be, if this is one-dimensional, then this bucks up to 3 dimensions, and then we have this one over here, and we have 2 of the similar faces, and this guy in the middle is pretty So, yeah, I don't know what we'd call that guy. He's pretty wild here. So when I'm doing mind mapping, I'm separating out that particular energetic channel from the body, and I'm saying, okay, what information do you have here? And what we find is that there is a fixed and repetitive way of being, okay? We are born pretty much with the capacity of having an infinite number of states of consciousness, an infinite number of shades of nuance in our states of consciousness. When we have a traumatic experience and it creates a freeze in who we're being, it limits who we are to just a tiny fraction of that infinite possibility. Now, generally, when you're doing work with most mental health folks, at best, they're working with one face, maybe two occasionally. They're working with fairly simple structures, primarily in the domain of the emotion field, which was one of the mind maps that we talked about. Well, there are a lot more complicated pieces out here. This is from a map that I call a spirit map or a belief system map. And we're not going to go into all the details, but it's a 10-dimensional map. Means that there are, if you will, there are typically 8 different, in this particular map, there's 8 different states of consciousness or ways of being that a person will exhibit in a robotic way. You can predict they're going to be in one of these places. And there's going to be a particular emotion and thought pattern associated with each of these different states. Along with the emotion and thought pattern, there's going to be a particular energy pattern. Typically, the acupuncture system will bear the brunt of the energetics. There will be a particular neurotransmitter pattern that's associated with each of these emotions and feelings. Very often, it's kind of like, Sybil or people with multiple personalities. It's like each of these personalities they're like a little bit different person. And a person will cycle, in the case of a spirit map, they'll cycle through one of these ways of being. Now, everybody in here, I am willing to bet, has at least 3 of these. And we get the first one when we wake up to the fact that something is really wrong with me or something, the world. And it's usually a little scary. Something is wrong. Okay, and we have to put a mask on because we feel like we on an ontological basis as a being are incapable of handling that there's something wrong. Now this typically happens 1 year, 2 year, 4 year, 5 years old, pretty early. And it's happening not in a real thought out kind of intellectual way. But this will set a stamp on that child's personality. Now, then they'll move along, and then somewhere at 5 to 10, 11, something like that, the second one will typically come along. And this one will temporarily be a fallback, if you will, to this one. And this is I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm inadequate. Okay? And so we'll put another set of masks on. Now, do you see what's happening to our authentic selves, to our infinite possibility of being as we add these fixed masks? It's being able to be us authentically is getting squeezed out. And finally, the third one that virtually everybody that I've ever tested will have sometime in their teenage or early adulthood years has to do with, I'm on my own. It's just me. And there will be a failure, if you will, in the faith of interconnection and connecting that will happen. So there's something wrong, and I'm not good enough, and I'm never really going to be together with anybody else. And those 3 different complex decisions that a person makes in the face of those three existential realities show up as a series of spirit maps. Now, sometimes when people will come in and this is the when we look at the person's energy and this is the first system that's screaming for help, then that person will be in a place where they're actually willing to look at one of these spirit maps. Is this making sense? Yeah.
Michael, I would like to know how you treat people.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that you're doing all this testing with filters and bio.
Uh-huh.
So after you get all your answers, or some of them, how will you treat them?
Okay. I work with my wife, who's a nutritional counselor, so we work a lot with food. I am an acupuncturist herbalist by training, and I train both here and in China. So I will use a lot of traditional Chinese interventions. In addition, I have an interest and will use flower remedies, NLP. I'll use some orthomolecular approaches. So that's pretty much my. I also do orthopedic Tuina, a very unusual way of correcting problems in the body structurally directly. I have a pretty big toolkit, and I try to fit. I try to fit my toolkit to the person as opposed to saying, I got this hammer here, and you look like a nail.
So are you doing the acupuncture?
I do. And in this case, I will often use magnets as well, needleless acupuncture as well as needle acupuncture.
So you might have, as you call them, 30 filters, 30 issues that one person might have in the field. Is that correct?
Well, when a person first comes in, I'm trying to do a process of triage, if you will. What's the biggest thing going on here? And fortunately, the body, for some reason, is kind enough to tell me which system is saying, hello, I am most toxic, I need work first. And when we connect with that mudra, a normal muscle will go weak. And in this case, I'm using filters instead because it's much faster. So that gives me one way to prioritize. Spirit map came up first. You are probably in some sort of existential crisis right now, and the possibility of reprogramming your beliefs is there's an opening now, but it's also a difficult time. Unfortunately, usually these complicated maps, like a spirit map, are most available for change when we are going through pure hell, when we are hitting rock bottom. I mean, do people find that? That's usually when we have an opportunity to actually shake up things, because we really get comfortable. And we get in our mask and we have these little life. The mask that we put on, there's a way in which it chooses our mates and our jobs and our purposes for us. One of the reasons why I'm interested in helping a person take the mask off is so that it's not the face that we had to put on in order to get through and survive when we were 3 years old or 13 or 23, making our life choices. I'm trying to find, what is that authentic person inside there? What does that person want to be up to? And I use high potency flower remedies, acupuncture, and NLP techniques in mind mapping a lot. And I'll work with other therapists too for folks that have a really deep issue.
Yeah, I still don't quite understand what you do when you test. I mean, originally, when you talked about it, I thought, well, you put someone in a mudra and maybe use a Moriyama device or something to measure acupuncture radiation.
It could be done that way. It could be done that way. What do? I do muscle testing. I do kinesiology. And I will put a person in circuit with one of these filters. And I've taken the mudras and I've turned them into scalar energetics. And when that's in circuit, it changes the response behavior of the person that we're testing.
So you have them hold a vial that has some
They're connected through just a little wire to the filters. And of course, we're then using those filters, for example, if we have a tissue filter, in this, like for me, I cross to different to different environmental allergens that might be giving me a problem. I could have crossed to different bacterial or viral samples to find a problem in an infection. But yeah, those are good questions. Does that make sense? Yes, way in the back.
I put together what you expressed is that between the ages of 5 and 15, people begin to create a mask on their face that expresses what you call a mudra. And you're getting in tune with this mudra, opening it up, so that they get to know a little bit more about what it is that they have perceived to be like?
You're mostly right. Remember this prism that's breaking out the light into 27 colors? So I'm saying at this point what I found is 27 different colors comprising the energetics of the person. I take that to mean there are 27 languages or systems in the human body. One of those 27 is down here, number 26 is our belief system. And that's what I was talking about. Within each system, like the nervous system, it's going to have its own world of languages and ways of testing. Within the spirit map, the belief system, it relates to that picture that I showed here. Each one of those 27 is, in essence, a different language. So what I've done is I've begun, in some cases in a skeletal way, and in this case, a fairly developed way, to decipher what is the language the body has within that given color called a belief system. And a belief system is, I believe, that the world is going to really, really beat me up. If I'm a victim, then it's like I'm really entitled to something better because the world is after me, and that would just be one aspect, and then there'd be other aspects within that person's kind of mask that they're wearing, and then it's like they are seeing through green-colored glasses or purple-colored glasses. Everything that comes into how they interpret how the world works goes through this filter of this mask, among others. Does that make sense? So the mudras is just a way of getting which of the, to allowing me to filter out one of those 27 systems. Well, what's interesting is about 80% of what we call personality is, I would say, the illusions of our mask. And then about 20% is authentic. What I want to do is open up the illusions, and all of a sudden that 20% becomes a tiny drop in a whole new opportunity of expression that person has. It just opens up, because all of a sudden, instead of this little tiny box of this is what I'm limited to, now they can go and do things. They can go anywhere. And there's subtleties and possibilities open that are just hard to describe. So, I'm an acupuncturist, right? So I think in terms of points. The thing about points is that the points on our body, which display altered electrical behavior, are like a monitor. They tell us what the internal state is, and they're essentially displayed like a monitor on the surface of the body. And as an acupuncturist, I'm used to like lasering or points or putting needles in or magnets or whatever. So what we know from a lot of research is that by altering these points, it changes the internal dynamics. So there is a communication, a command and control communication cycle of the inside telling the outside what's going on, and the outside providing a conduit for us to change what's going on the inside. Right? This makes sense? So the mapping, part of the mapping that we're doing is learning how to get this display to give us a coherent, useful set of information. And the first huge step that we've taken is the ability to divide the information of the body. Just like, I only want to see one of the 27. I don't want to be overwhelmed with all 27 sets of information chaotically showing up in the body. I just want to see one thing. So that's what the mudra-derived filters provide us, is that ability to simplify things so we can make sense of things. Now, I'm interested in mapping the energetic physiology of the body. I consider the acupuncture system to be one. There are other people who wonder if there's quantum communication systems that are happening within the cytosolic structure of our cells. There's the etheric body, which is one that I also map. It's a fairly simple one. Our biomagnetic, bioelectrical. There's another system there which we'll get into shortly. The scalar system we'll talk about shortly. The chakra system, interpersonal, we'll talk about here right now. Let's just go ahead and look at that. Hello. So get HEP. Get the human energetic points. Our patterns reflect what our status of health or disease is. So this is great. If we can now separate this information from the body into something coherent and workable, what I can do is I can begin to use points in the body, not just the acupuncture system, but primarily that's what we're going to be talking about here. For example, there's a porphyry is a blood disorder. It has to do with, it can be related to a genetic problem. And there is a point on the gallbladder. It turns out the gallbladder and liver channels, once I've got the filter set on right, turn out to display genetic and chromosomal problems. Keep using that to change the screen. Migraines. Here's a migraine point. This is very close to liver 3, Tai Chong, greater rushing on the body. When I put the gene filter on with somebody that has migraines and I test this point and it has an altered electrical characteristics that indicate it's active, I know that one of several genes, that particular gene related to migraine is occurring. Turns out there's another migraine gene test point up there. I'm not going to go through a huge number of these. Here's an oncogene point on the liver near liver 8. What I guess I'm trying to put out in a schematic way is the possibility that our body will actually display for us our genetic vulnerabilities. It's just right there. Another mapping we can look at is the scalar system. Everybody recognize what that is? The caduceus, right? And the caduceus, this is actually a Mercury engine according to some people. But a caduceus is, instead of a coil, we have some engineer types in here. A coil is, you typically wrap a coil around and around in one direction. But a bifilar way of wrapping a coil is that you have a electrical current going in that direction right along beside one that's going the opposite direction. And this would be an example of that kind of wiring. And why am I talking about this? What happens is when you run the wires that way, you create a cancellation field. And it cancels out the great majority of the normal electromagnetic field that's around an electrical current. Now, has everybody heard of the right-hand rule? You can learn the right-hand rule real quick. You take your right hand. Everybody have a right hand? You stick a thumb out that direction. That is the direction of the electrical current. Your fingers curl around in the direction of the magnetic component of that electromagnetic field. So electrical, magnetic. Now what happens if you've got another guy going that way? I don't have two right hands, so you're going to have to imagine that one creating a field going that way. You cancel those two out, right? So some people feel like when that happens, something very bizarre happens. They feel you create a scalar or a longitudinal wave. And some people even think that this wave has some very odd properties, faster than light, possibilities, time changes, all kinds of funny things. I don't know about any of that, but I do know that when you take a scalar coil, I just can't get that, can I? You can find a series of points on the body that come in groups of 3. And you can put these tiny scalar generators on, in this case, 3 different points, first, second, and third, in that order. And you can actually change immunoglobulin E, just like that. So if, for example, if I had to use this system when I was treating my allergies, I could have just stopped the extra production of immunoglobulin E. Just boom, just stops it. The only problem is I haven't completely figured out how to communicate that I want this immunoglobulin E problem, like in allergies, to be permanently fixed. So if one of the little scalar generators comes off, it will also come back exactly that fast as well. So I regard this particular system, which I have a suspicion is related to how homeopathy works, that there is a scalar communication system in the body. I have some proof, but it's not nailed down. That this is how homeopathy works, that there is a way of immediately communicating information to the body. And we're just beginning to understand this. Red blood cells, so there's a 3-point system here, first, second, and third. That allows me to work with problems in the red blood cells. Okay, so it's just another map. Remember, scalar was one of our bioenergetic systems that we could separate out. So this is yet another one, and this is in the mind mapping. Okay, this is the interpersonal system, and I also call it the character map. Is what I basically have tried to understand this particular system is relating to. And it relates to the acupuncture system called a system of 12 channels called the divergent system. Now, each of the divergent systems for the lungs, for the heart, the pericardium, whatnot, relate to, according to this information that I've developed, relates to a different character aspect. For example, the pericardium system, in order to activate the divergent system, you go from a pericardium point here at the elbow to the pericardium point, original pericardium starting point up here on the chest. When you measure the energetic activity in this channel, you talked about personality earlier. This really gets starting to hit home with personality. I can tell you how open that person is going to be to giving and receiving. If that energy is in one direction, they're going to be giving, receiving. They're just going to be just open. On the other hand, if that energetics is closed down, they're going to be very, very shy about opening up to that. So obviously, so what it creates is what I call a character stat. Just like there's a thermostat on the wall and you want to set the temperature down, you can set it down low. And that person is going to be a little careful about giving and receiving, or that can be set real high. Now here's the thing about our character map. I think the way that this character map is probably supposed to work is that when you're with somebody who you have a relationship, an interpersonal relationship to where giving and receiving is in order, then that energy should be moving quite freely. When you're with somebody who maybe that's not the appropriate thing, that energy won't be moving so freely. I'll give you another one. Anybody know anybody who has a real hard time completing things? Okay. So it turns out completion, which also relate to grace, is also related to the spleen diversion channel. So if a person has low energy in that spleen diversion channel, they're going to have a hard time completing. They're just not going to be there. By the same token, if that energy is in excess, they're going to be obsessive. It's like, you know, there's a fire, we've got to go. Well, excuse me, I've got to finish this tax return because, no, there's a fire, you have to go. Well, you know, so obsessive compulsive behavior could, you know, is an extension of the continuum line of energy that can happen in the spleen energetics. Now, there's 12 of these: spontaneity, courage, purpose, let's see, trust, trustworthiness, responsibility, and choice. Okay, so I can do a pretty good personality profile just by looking at the energetics from low, medium high, high of each of these character stats. Now, can that be changed? Yes. For me, this was the most exciting mind map I did. For me to figure these out, I had to actually work them out on myself. So when I did this one, that was the one that was most opening and kind of in terms of spiritual growth for me. It was just like the next day, you know, all the rules were different. And I was able to be with people in a way that I couldn't have been before. Okay, so let's start putting some things together. So what's health? You know, there's a lot of different, as above, so below, you know, as below, so above. There's a lot of different ways we can look at health. We can look at it from an energetic point of view. This is supposed to be a DNA from a genetic point of view, from the cellular level, from the whole body and organ level. When things are running right, energetically, DNA cells, the whole thing, then everything's good. And they just are sending information of health. Flexibility, power, resilience. Well, life isn't quite like that all the time. We have stress, we have toxic load come along, and our energetics can get out. That can create problems and mutations, point mutations in our DNA, which can create all kinds of odd accumulations of material in our cell, free radical damage, etc. Eventually can show up as tissues and organs having problems or other systemic issues. So health, sickness, there's still, you know, what my job is to help a person, not do it, but help a person do cleanup. You know, we want to aim back something close to that level there. So this is a toxemia or a toxicity model of health. And I think it applies to most of these 27 maps we're talking about. Each, you know, for a spirit map, a toxin is one of these mask systems. For the interpersonal map, toxicity is being very fixed in who you're being with giving and receiving or with completion. For a tissue, it could be an infection. So those are different kinds of toxicities. So what do we have? Toxic chemicals, toxic electromagnetic fields, pathogens, other life forms. They have their own agenda, and they come into us and create a toxic load. And of course, our bodies, in just daily function, we're creating a certain amount of toxicity too. So it's not just exogenous toxins, but our own body is making problems. And of course, we're all interested in getting rid of those toxins, and so we want to drain them. So when we can drain things faster than we bring them in, we're in good shape. I'm going to talk now, we're going to focus a little bit on tissues and organs. 5 minutes? Really? Till we're really, really finished? Till break. Oh, good. Good. The timing is going to be perfect. Okay, so what is health? So over here we have functional health. Ideally, this is where you want to be in all your 27 systems. Dynamic health. It can move down in this direction in compensation, dysfunction. Eventually, you can move into these 6 phases, and these are part of organic pathology. Now, health is being smart versus being very hard to read. Being unintelligent, dumb, right? When our bodies are healthy, we have more flexibility, we're working faster, sharper, better. So health is really a more intelligent state. There's better energy when we're in health, and there's more toxic energy when we're talking in sickness. When we're healthy, okay, let's go with the unhealthy. There's chaos or rigidity. For example, the mind maps that we talked about, the spirit maps, those create a rigidity, okay? Or chaotic behavior, but it's not that fluid, graceful, powerful, what I call liquid complexity. In that liquid complexity, riding the boundary of liquidness versus gas or solid, that liquid complexity is where our health is. We can access our resources when we're healthy versus here we have deficiencies and excesses when we're not healthy. Our communication system in health is good and strong versus when we're not healthy, our communications are in breakdown and are broken up piecemeal. We have an agreement for the betterment of the whole. The entire multicellular system is saying, yeah, every cell, all those trillion cells say, yeah, I want to work for the health of this whole organism. Even though I may not live that long, I'm working for the health of the whole thing. There is an agreement at the level of energetic communication between every cell in the body that says, yeah, we're for this whole body. But in disease, eventually when you get into things like cancer, which we will begin to unravel why there's cancer, that agreement breaks down. And pretty soon it's every cell for itself. And those cells start reverting back to their original bacterial form from whence our inner animal cells originally derived. And we're going to talk about, when we come back, how we can reboot this healthy information over the toxic disease information, and we can get those selfish cells to actually start becoming back into the agreement of the whole body again. So if you guys picked up a card, it's missing a website. We have a website that's just kind of been launched. The name of our website for the clinic is livelongerlivestronger.com. And please come and visit. There's a lot of information on there. We're, changing and evolving, but it goes into a lot of things that we've covered in a great more depth and detail than I can cover flying by our 20,000-foot overview of the different communication systems in the body. And there's a question in the back.
Well, it's actually a request if you have time. I don't know if you'll have time, but if you have time, I really like it when you give specific examples and kind of have time to kind of work through something and kind of how you would approach it. I would love that.
Okay, for each system or for a general person, an example of a sick person who's got different pieces. Okay, let me see if I can work that in. Okay, remind me as we go along here. So anyway, what we've done here is we've got 6 stages of organic pathology and 3 stages of functional pathology. Has anybody heard of functional medicine, Jeffrey Bland, Dr. Stone, David Jones? Right, so yeah, he's awesome. I love to go hear him. I feel like Jeff is kind of my biochemical counterpart. Well, we have some similarities in kind of, I think our brain's going to work in a similar kind of way. I've trained myself not to talk as fast as Jeff. I've tried to rein myself in. So I appreciate everybody who did stay, and you get a gold star for endurance or something, I don't know. So in in modern German biological medicine and all of these testing modalities, up until about 12 years ago, there was no way to distinguish when you tested a liver tissue against the person's body. If there was a problem with the liver tissue, you could get a muscle change and say, oh, well, we got a liver problem. then you'd say, well, doc, what's the problem? And you'd say, I have no idea. There's a liver problem. Well, everybody's got some liver problems. So virtually every liver on the planet subjected to the kind of chemical toxicity, et cetera, that we're in is going to show some problems. So in essence, having tests of this sensitivity render a positive test on a liver, say, fairly irrelevant.
Just, excuse me, do you use a BICOM or one of the high-tech machines with the testing?
I have to reveal a little bit of prejudice here on the Biocom and some of the other tests. I personally do not believe that there is any machine in existence, including the squid, which by far is the most sensitive machine we have, that can register the subtle energetics of the body. If I had a Biocom and you say, well, I'm putting an antenna in front of the person and I'm picking up some energetics, there is no way that that machine can pick up the subtle energetics of the body, swamped as we are by the electromagnetics here, the FM radio waves. When a squid, everybody know what a squid is, a superconducting quantum interference device? It's this supercooled, huge coil that is able to turn the tiniest little electromagnetic field from a nerve or the heart's pretty easy, or in the brain. It turns that little electrical field. Remember the right-hand rule? You know? So there's a little bitty thumb, little bitty thing, little bitty current going, and it creates a low magnetic field. This huge coil is able to amplify that tiny output from a nerve to the point where you can actually measure it and read it. They have to bury these things, usually underground. They're surrounded in a Faraday cage, which is this huge magnetic thing that keeps all this stray electromagnetic noise out, and they are barely able to register nerves. The kind of energetics we're talking about in this mapping is millions of times, smaller. The only way that I'm able to do what we do, and people that do muscle testing do what we do, is that we use a phenomena of biological amplification. That means we use the most complicated device on Earth, called the human body, to amplify the signal so another human body can actually find that it's there. If we did not have biological amplification, there's no way any of those machines get even close to looking at subtle energetics. Now, I'm going to talk here in a few minutes, if I can get myself to it, about a way that we could develop a device that could do a true objective measurement of our energetic physiology. And I'm pretty excited about this, because if we can truly measure our acupuncture energetics, we not only understand the mechanism of acupuncture, we now have the camel's nose in the tent. Because once acupuncture is understood, and we understand how that works, and we have an objective way of measuring the phenomena of acupuncture, it opens the way for all of those other energetic systems like the scalar system and maybe the quantum systems, which are even more subtle still, to be able to be registered, because the acupuncture system is like an antenna constantly registering and sensing changes in those other energetic systems, or at least that's what I believe. Was that a long-winded answer or what? Okay. So I actually, I probably should have warned you before you didn't leave at the break. One of my hats is as director of Rosetta Stone is that we're looking for funding, because I know people that are trying to work in this world, they scratch their heads and say, hey, we want to make this stuff and do all these great things. Well, how do we make money? Well, I guess we have to build a product, even before the basic science has really been nailed down. And I want to do something different here. I want to make Ashland the place where they did the basic research. They really got their ducks in a row. They created a device that actually is based on real science, not on wishful thinking. And they actually have a way of measuring the energetic physiology of humans. And I think it will be the way that the door is open for homeopaths and other energy practitioners. Once we can begin to show how those systems impact the acupuncture energetic fields, we can begin to understand how they work. Slowly, we can begin to understand all of the energetic physiologies, and I think there's several that work in a human. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And how did the Chinese
Uh-huh.
How do they validate? Is it just by results?
There's a lot of theories. Okay, so the question was, how did the Chinese figure this stuff out? And how do they validate it? Okay. Well, they probably weren't interested in validation quite like we are. But you know, it doesn't, remember, biological amplification is where I start. You know, it doesn't take a lot of training to where you can actually kind of sense an acupuncture point. I had one of my students, one of the sweetest women I've ever met. She was just a sweetheart. She came back to get her acupuncture license in her, I guess, early 50s. And she told me, and I completely believe her. She's one of those people who you just like, okay, this person I would believe. She could see the points. Her brain was able to biologically amplify things and somehow or another say that she saw something. And how that happened, I couldn't begin to explain. So I think there have always been people that have been able to, had particularly sensitive neural nets and energetic nets. And so they could actually see something. I don't think, they did not have the kind of tools in ancient China that I have today to figure out the exact pathways of things. I can test yes and no. This channel goes here, this point is here, here, and here. I can define that within a millimeter, but there were probably people who had extraordinary senses that could tap into that. Okay. Shall we go? Okay. So anyway, what I've done is, I not only made my little mudra system of developing 27 different colors of the energetic physiology and began to develop a language for most of those 27. There's one of them that I completely has befuddled me. I have no idea what it relates to, but 26 of them I've got a pretty good handle on. Okay. It's frustration right now because I have no idea. I've actually haven't even looked at it in a couple of years. I'm so frustrated. I won't even look at it. But at the level of tissues and organs, I can now do something better than, remember the liver, everybody's liver shows up, right? I can now distinguish, is it functional or is it organic pathology? And if it is organic, I can distinguish which of these 6 different phases it's in. And we're going to talk about those 6 phases. This tremendously increases the value of a muscle test on a particular tissue or organ. The fact that you can actually tell somebody, well, yeah, you've got an inflammation, or you have a deposit, or you have a cancer, or you have of course, I wouldn't tell somebody you had cancer without doing confirmatory tests, but we at least can know that there's necrosis or possibly neoplasm if the energetics relate to this last state. And unfortunately, I see that all too often, and unfortunately, I'm usually right. So, dynamic health. Okay, this is over in function, and that's good function. You know, the body's here, the energy's good, DNA, cells, dynamic. Ideally, you're born something like that. Now, there's still a little toxic load happening just because that's life. And our own bodies generate a certain amount, but we drain it as fast as we make it. This is good. Well, life happened, you get kicked upside the head a couple of times too many, and your body goes into compensation. Energetics are a little off, but you know, things are still looking good. You're compensating. You can do that for a while. You do it too long, you stop being able to compensate, and you actually start moving into dysfunction. You began to start showing subtle problems, but it's still of a functional level. It's okay, I'm going to show my age here. Do you remember when you actually could go into a carburetor and change the points, right? Okay. And so when the carburetor points are off on a car, that was a functional problem because all you had to do was change the timing, wear things around a little bit. Yeah, oh, those cool things. You could do all that. You can't do any of that now, but that was a functional problem with the car. You change the points and it sings, it runs great. That's largely when you have a functional problem with a person. You can change how they're eating, change their attitude, change their behaviors, and you can get them back going. So But if a person doesn't do that, you start moving into the organic pathology stages. Remember, we're talking about tissues and organs. This is the way that we interpret what's going on for those two particular colors of the 27. So excretion, it's like swelling. You know, like when I was having my allergies, my eyes were running and it was yucky. Nose was running. This is the equivalent of you've got a mess on the driveway, you take your hose and you start just hosing off the driveway trying to clean it off. And that's what the cells are trying to do. They just release fluids as a way to flush away the problem. If that doesn't work, remember, you know, we've gone from that smart, healthy, we're moving to where there's more and more of the toxic information, not so smart. So now we move into inflammation. This is the equivalent of a toxic waste incinerator. You've got a mess, you've got trash, throw it in the dump, burn it up. And if you can kill off whatever you need to kill off, the chemicals, the bugs, the bacteria, whatever, great. However, and you notice our toxic load is spilling over even more, okay, and we're not draining out adequately. If that doesn't work, we go into deposition phase. Deposition phase is deposits, okay? So for a heart, what would a deposition phase be? Atherosclerosis, plaque. For a gallbladder. Gallstones, kidneys, kidney stones. It's calcifications. It's the equivalent of, okay. So this would be like companies coming and you take all the trash and you throw it into the closet because you don't want the company seeing your mess. That's the deposit phase. Lesions. You'll notice, we're starting to have problems at as above, so below. Things are getting perhaps a little worse. These are non-healing sores. This is the level where viruses are beginning to actually, they penetrated the cell nucleus and are activating or becoming inserted into the chromosomes. Dysplasia. Dysplasia, remember we talked about health being an agreement for the whole body, and each individual cell subjugated its own desires to the greater whole. So dysplasia is the cells are kind of looking around in the trenches, and it's like mortars are coming through, and they're saying, why did we sign up for this war? I don't think we signed up for this nasty environment here. And so the cells are getting restless, they're getting bigger, they're maybe proliferating and multiplying a little bit. They're trying to create a solution on a local individual cell level. They no longer think the body as a whole is going to get them out of this mess. Finally, you move into necrosis or neoplasm. So this is cell death, or could be apoptosis, which is actually a better option in some ways than the alternative, which is neoplasm, where you actually boot up a cancer. Now, we're going to talk in a little while, but I'll just mention it here so you have it in your head. If the cell has lost the agreement of, hey, we're going to support the whole body, and the cell says, hey, it's just out for me, then it begins to multiply and look after its own agenda, which is propagating and proliferating itself. So that's cancer. One way of thinking about that is that the cell is under a lot of local stress because it's locally toxic. There's chemicals around that make things very difficult. It's who watches Star Trek? Because I have this great analogy. Okay, only half the people. Okay, it's kind of like when they would try to go into warp drive, but the warp field doesn't hold, right? So when the cells are in this and they say, we're going to become a stem cell and we'll be reborn and it will be great again, except for the warp drive doesn't hold in cancer. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. So what's interesting is cancer cells have a very negative charge. Energetically, they're very negative. And Nordstrom and some others have attempted to cure cancer by forcing them, pumping in basically positive energetics. His approach doesn't quite work. However, as we'll see later, there may be some opportunities for remodeling the electrodynamics of the cell in order to treat cancer. And there's a drug out there. It's actually not owned by a pharmaceutical company, so you can be sure this will not be coming to a drugstore near you in the near future. And a Canadian university has demonstrated that the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, has a very altered electrical behavior. The mitochondria is actually generating a lot of the electrical charge in the body, and it becomes very, very negative. DCA normalizes that, and it's very interesting. As soon as it normalizes the electrical properties of the cell mitochondria leaks out certain chemicals that set off apoptosis, and eventually those cells with cancer just die off. So there's a lot of very interesting possibilities with biophysics treatment of cancer. Subtle biophysics, not raining radiation down to kill them, but subtle communications that might actually have an effect on cancer. And frankly, it's gonna take individual support from visionaries to make any of this kind of stuff really happen, because there's no big corporates entities that would benefit from this. DCA is not a patentable drug.
Do you ever address the issue of pH, body pH, on your patients with illness and cancer issues?
Good question, and yes, the pH issues come under the second system, the chemistry system, and so yes, you try to adjust pH.
Does DCA stand for like chemicals?
It does, and it's I don't remember it enough to. It's an actual chemical. It's not that I'm actually, it's not the perfect chemical, but it's interesting that in some cases, changing the electrical behavior of the mitochondria caused amazing tumor reductions, sizes, big tumors going down to virtually nothing. Not every time, it's not a perfect thing, but so now I'm going to kind of step.
The question is, how do you manage the pH?
Where the first thing when somebody says their pH is off, you have to ask the following question: pH where? The pH inside the lumen of the gut is different from inside the bloodstream, which is different inside the cells, because the bloodstream is buffered extensively. It's hardly ever a pH difference in the bloodstream, but the tissues themselves can become, always acidic. That's always the bad guy, but it's not. It's not that simple. I start with the stomach because I find so many people's gut pH is wrong, and I'll mention one little quick fact. Okay, who thinks that the rainforest is the soil in the rainforest is going to be just chock full of bacteria? It's just going to be amazingly full of bacteria. Who's gonna buy that? Oh, come on. Rainforest, birds, things. Okay, I got two suckers. I got two. Excuse me, did I say that? What about the desert? Chock full of bacteria. Who's going to buy that? Nobody's going to buy that. Okay, a desert has millions of times more bacteria in the soil than the rainforest. Why? Because the pH is within a range that bacteria can tolerate better. So pH is the ultimate determinant of the bacterial conditions in your body. So pH is really, really important. You've got to get the pH in the stomach right, because if you don't get that right, the pancreas won't respond right, the bicarbonate won't come out right, then the gut fecal matter is wrong, and then you're growing all the wrong bacteria in your gut.
But your pH in the stomach is naturally acidic, whereas what you want to eat is more sensitive to alcohol.
It's too complex a question to go into. And it's a good thing to get into, but that's where you actually start, and it turns out you want a good, strong acidic response in the stomach, and a lot of people have lost that, and that's where you got to start. Okay, so I'm putting on my Rosetta Stone Institute hat now, and we're going to go back to my Rosetta Stone picture. Okay, so unknown, that's the hieroglyphics. The unknown that I'm really interested in is full human regeneration. And on the way to finding that, I'm really interested in what is the mechanism of acupuncture? Because we've been trying for 40, 50 years to figure it out, and we still don't really have a good idea. What are the decoding keys? Electrophysiology and confirmation through biochemical evaluations. I work in partnership with Dr. Gita Jensen in Klamath Falls. She's an immunologist, cell biologist, and her lab is out there. And, she's one of those few scientists who's really left a very secure academic position at McGill Medical University, where she ran a lab with 50 people under. She says, no, I want to really go and do some real work that might benefit people, not just a pharmaceutical company. And she's willing to work with us if we can pull the finances together to begin to understand some of these electrical factors. She's willing to work with us. So this is taken at our clinic. I think mapping the energetic physiology of humans will unlock many mysteries of healing and regeneration. And so I want to contrast true salamander-like regeneration with the stem cell work that we read about in the newspapers all the time. So stem cell work can work for a few cells, not big projects like Parkinson's. It can help replace some of those cells that cause Parkinson's. True regeneration can not only do those kind of small projects, but it can do big projects, entire limbs, organs. One of our first things that we want to do is type 1 diabetes, juvenile diabetes. The beta cells in the pancreas have been destroyed. We want to regrow those. We're looking for people that can help fund that. Stem cells. You basically take cells out, you do artificial chemical stimulation with tropic factors, et cetera. Maybe you manipulate the genes, and then you reintroduce them back in the same body that produced the problematic cells. You're not doing any cleanup of the toxic load. What we want to do is do naturally orchestrated recapitulation of the embryonic conditions, the physics and the chemistry. What does that mean? A salamander, in a small way, recreates the conditions that happened in the womb, in the embryo. We think we don't have all of the same capacities that a salamander does in terms of the number of cells that respond to regeneration, but we have enough. We think that we can, in fact, recreate the conditions of the embryo within a sub area, an anatomical subspace in our bodies. Regrow that pancreas, that limb, that spine. Okay, when you just inject stem cells into a body, you're ignoring that in the embryo there are electrical controls that say, okay, you can stop growing now, you can keep growing, but you stop over there. Oh, you need to be a pancreas cell. No, you need to be a muscle cell. The fates of cells, as they differentiate, is controlled by an electrical milieu and an ion milieu. If you just inject stem cells into the body, you do increase the risk of cancer and problems because there's no controls over telling those cells what they should be. And you're sticking them into a bad neighborhood. These neighborhoods are already, getting the mortar shells and coming in, they're looking at each other and say, why are we living, why am I working for this guy? He won't eat right, he won't go exercise. So if we do it the way the body actually does it, we want to recapitulate the natural process, it's going to be safer. Stem cells, expensive, high-tech, big corporate medicine. That's not all, it's not bad that it's big corporate, except for I would prefer that if we had it affordable and that we could do regeneration remodeling at local and regional centers. All right. So a salamander. There's a very, very strong current of injury when a little salamander has some sort of severe trauma. For example, if its leg gets bitten off, it can regrow. If its tail gets yanked off, we've all done this with lizards. The little tail comes off and eventually it regrows it. You know, this is really amazing. You can divide the heart of a salamander, and if you can keep the blood moving, within hours, it's largely stitched itself back together, and within 3 days, you can't ever tell it was injured. Okay, you think of people with heart disease? What if we just get them to regrow that entire area of their heart? Very little people this would work with. About that, little tiny people. Yeah, that's right. There we go. So if this little leg gets chopped, you can see within several weeks that little tiny bud turning into an entirely new limb. Okay. So we're getting back to those 27 systems and whatnot. The two that we're going to focus on for the rest of this lecture is the acupuncture and the bioelectric system. And because both of these are intelligent energetic communication and calculation systems. After you cut the leg off of a frog or a salamander, the first thing is that it drops to about 20 millivolts positive in both of those animals. And however, the frog stays at this kind of moderately positive stage for, here we go up to about 20 days. When it gets back up to 0, and a little after that, a little after 3 weeks, it gets back to towards its previous state. The salamander does something very different. After just a very short time at this positive stage, the injury current all of a sudden flips over to negative. Okay, that turns out to be a very, very crucial observation that Becker made. Smith's experiment did something very simple. He took a thermocouple, which is simply a bimetal strip that's heated, creates a small electrical current, and he put a thermocouple facing one direction to where the positive side was at that end, and the little froggy never got past the same stump that it started with. But if you take that thermocouple and you keep, this isn't exactly how the experiment was done, but it gives you a sense of it. If you create that negative effect and you keep extending the negative effect towards the very outer range of what's regrowing in from this direction outwards, you can actually get quite a bit more regrowth of the frog. Not complete, but you can get a lot more in the direction of a salamander. So what we've done is we said the salamander goes for a negative field. If we make a frog do the same thing, it has a lot more capacity to regenerate than it normally would. A frog doesn't really regenerate any better than we do. So then they extended it to a mammal. And you got a fairly similar situation. You were able to, if the amputation was at the shoulder, they were able to actually get it to regrow fully formed forearms, and you can actually see the ghost cartilaginous wrist bones. And basically a mouse has exactly the same physiology, the same anatomy largely as we do. Same bones, same muscles, etc. So they were able to get down to the wrist bone and actually in some cases even see little spicules showing where the fingers were going to be. So the electricity is a big player. It's not everything, but it's a big player. The major limitations that we have over a salamander is that after an amputation, a salamander can, it's like martial law. It comes in and says, you, and you, all of you cells are now going to become stem cells. And they say, okay. And they turn into stem cells. We're a lot more limited in the number of cells that will respond to that particular message. There is probably a way of getting our cells to do it too. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some money. You can tell where I'm going with that, can't you? Okay. So this is just a report on how this idea has been applied to humans. This was an area of active research in the 50s, actually started in Japan and here in the 60s and 70s. And they used electrical stimulation to work on non-union fractures. This is one of the major orthopedic problems that has still not been resolved. Sometimes bones just don't work right. Have you ever heard of that? You know, somebody said, oh, they had to re-break his bone. You've heard that. They're trying to reboot the phenomena, the electrical phenomena, and everything that happens when a bone normally repairs. And what they found is if they resupply an electrical stimulus, about 80% more or less of those bones will actually repair normally. So, you know, we've been talking stem cells just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what a stem cell is like a wild card in a poker. You know, it can be anything. And my wife said, you know, that's a bad analogy. And, you know, I was like, okay, maybe I should take it out. And then I was reading about the Joker, and the cards is actually the symbol of birth, rebirth, and death. So I said, no, the wild card stays. So a stem cell can turn into any kind of cell you need. Okay, we're running a little tight on time. Just suffice it to say, if I change the electrical orientation of this poor little planaria, I can turn that head into a tail and this tail into a head. Electricity determines the fate of cells. In the human, we have now found, Professor Levine and with Harvard has found at the stage of 4 cells in the human embryo, there is a pole, if you will, that will create like a north pole or a global positioning satellite field. On one tiny area of the embryo will be left. The rest of the electrical generation poles will be gotten rid of. And that will create then an orientation. Boom, that's north for the embryo as it grows. That will then help determine the fates of all those cells and make sure that you don't have 2 hearts or heart on the right side or 2 livers and all the rest. A lot of those are problems of electrical coordination of morphogenesis problem. That electrical system eventually turns into, I believe, the acupuncture system in the adult. Okay? So now we've got a connection between the acupuncture system and recreating the embryonic environment through electricity. So this gives you an idea. There's lines of voltage, which gives you one set of information. There's lines of current flow. If you add those 2 together, every single point in this field between that information and that information has a unique address.
You're saying the electrical component is much more significant than the DNA, the genetics?
So the genetics is the hard disk. The electrical is the application that says, oh, I want that bit of information and I want that bit, but no, I don't want you. So they're both critical, but how much good is your hard disk walking around? I mean, can you put it to your head? Does it work? No, you've got to have applications that access it and use it properly. This is one of the electrical system is one of the ways that has not been recognized on how we do this. Good question.
Well, I was just thinking of Becker.
Yeah.
His work, why hasn't it progressed since it started?
Becker ran afoul of the U.S. military because he said these big antennas you want to talk to your submarines are a health hazard, and a guy who should have got the Nobel Prize right now he's basically he's non-cognizant. He has advanced Alzheimer's. And right now, we would have a cure for Alzheimer's if Becker had been properly funded. We'd have had a cure for a lot of things. That guy should have got the Nobel Prize. Absolutely, yeah, that kind of thing. So my question for Ashlyn, because we're running out of time here, is, you know, if you leave your funding in the hands of big government corporations, so we're looking for a local baseline of support. Because we think we can, once we have something that works, then the money potential will be such that it will never get stuffed back into the bag. But we've got to have all the ducks in a row. We have a series of 4 experiments. I was going to do that later, but since I'm running out of time, we have a series of 4 experiments that'll be go, no go. I have my hypothesis is that there is a semiconductor communication system that is the mechanism of acupuncture, and that is closely tied to the regeneration mechanism. We will be able to show whether or not that is true. We've raised about $50,000. A minimum amount that we need to go forward is about another $55,000. We would like to have about $95,000 to be fully funded for this next stage in our experiments. That would probably allow us to be able to get mechanisms research from the NIH. We could get some more serious money to take it further. But frankly, you pretty much have to prove what you're going to prove before you can go to the NIH to get money to prove it. It's kind of like getting a loan from a bank. You have to have the money in order to go to the bank to get the money. Okay, so the amount of money is chicken feed. I mean, it's not to you and me, but for medical research, $100,000, $50,000. I mean, they do that on expense accounts for their CEOs. For us, it's real money. What we're going to do is, I actually have the specs on a series of instruments from National Instruments. There's been a huge advance in the kind of sensitivity and rapidity of computer-based electrical instrumentation over what Becker had. We're just in a completely different world. And for a relatively small amount of money, we can get devices that Becker would have he could have gone to town with. So yeah, we actually have our parts list. We're waiting on some money. So this answers your question. These are the generals that give the privates, the biochemicals, and the genes their marching orders. So the electricity is like that. Everybody is going to eventually, if we can make this system work, everybody is going to need it. Because we all get older. We all have trauma. We all have things happen. So neurodegenerative diseases, liver cirrhosis, these are just a few of the kind of illnesses that all could be impacted. Wherever there's tissue loss, regeneration would be an optimal intervention. Our first clinical trial that we want to work with, as I said, is juvenile or type 1 diabetes. So, just very quickly, a salamander never gets cancer. Salamanders don't get cancer. There we go. If you take a frog tumor and stick it on a salamander, the salamander will get the frog tumor and it will spread and it'll kill the salamander. However, if you put the frog tumor in, let's say you put it right here on that shoulder that we've been keep amputating, and you cut through half the tumor, leave half of it on, plenty to kill the thing. But if you cut half of it off and you get the body to say, wait a minute, we need to regenerate, guess what happens to every single one of those cancer cells? They normalize. This is unheard of in Western medicine. You kill cancer cells. You don't normalize them. Guess what? 100% are normalized. And they actually, when they look in the salamander, they'll find the little froggy cells that used to be cancer cells behaving like perfectly behaved nerves, bones, etc. So instead of injecting stem cells into a dirty body, we want to clean up the foundation. We want to get it strong, detoxify the body. Then we want to engender enough stem cells to regenerate. That's the basic model. So that's kind of how we feel sometimes. We got to get that foundation straight. And in the case of diabetes, here are some different things that we might use. You were talking about pH and whatnot. That might be something else you would correct. And when you're ready to regenerate, because you've got the basic toxicity down to a decent level, we start getting the stem cells to go and rebuild that house. So this gets to your question. This could be a new paradigm in medicine. How much would it cost? One person staying in one hospital bed, getting no services, just lying in a hospital bed. If we had that income from that one person, sitting in a hospital bed, this nameless person, if we had the same amount of income, that would allow our institute to look at the possibility of this, of Becker's work being really the next step in medicine. So these are some of the things we talked about. The electrophysiology instruments are much better. There's a greater acceptance of a computer model. Essentially what we're saying is the acupuncture system needs to be reverse engineered in the same way you would a computer. It's a semiconducting system that runs on biodiodes. This acupuncture point is probably a biotransformer. We can reverse engineer it. Part of the problem is this whole way of thinking about medicine is completely interdisciplinary. You need a biophysicist on the team, you need a biologist, and you need an acupuncturist. You need a very strange mix of practitioners that you don't normally find in medicine, but this kind of interdisciplinary thinking is now become much more accepted. So the money then is, I think, one of our biggest challenges. So we're looking for visionaries. That's right, AMA is going to pony up big money. So I've really just talked and talked and talked. So is there any other questions or any comments?
Are you familiar with Bruce Lipton's biology belief?
Yeah, Bruce Lipton is kind of an informal, on our scientific advisory board in an informal way.
Yeah, because that kind of blew me away. He goes away from the DNA into the whole communication.
Right.
I mean, it seems like he
Right. So, well, here's what to know about Bruce. Bruce has written great books, and he's a very interesting guy. And he's had no funding to be able to do any science for 15 years. He was. But if you're in the mainstream, you do mainstream science. If you leave the mainstream, then you got to figure out a way to fund yourself. If you guys want a revolutionary approach, a metaphysical approach that will land over there in the hardware store so that everybody can get it and it'll just be like, of course, we're going to have to figure out a way for the visionaries to figure out a way to fund it.
We've got a few visionaries from the ex-medical community that are running.
Yep. So, we talked about dropping a pebble and creating a ripple. And networking, like the 5 degrees, 6 degrees of separation, that's kind of what I'm asking for. It's like you may not be able to reach in your pocket and write a check to our institute. If you can, wonderful, please. But maybe you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And maybe you'll talk to somebody who'll talk to somebody who'll talk to somebody. So that's what I'm asking for. If you guys are interested in the kind of the medical clinical services, I put my practitioner hat on, and I'm happy to talk to you guys about any of that. And I'm here to answer any questions, but otherwise, I think our show is officially done. Was that interesting? Okay, thank you so much.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.